Alright, welcome back to a new TouchDesigner tutorial. And in this one we are going to look at how to create a sort of automated video cutting program or a little tool with which we can just select a bunch of videos from a specified folder and just like sort of cycle through them, either like in alphabetical order or randomly based on different input. So you can see we have a bunch of custom parameters here with which we can control our input. And so we have a few different options of how we can cut between or sort of switch between one video to the other. So we can either just base this on an LFO and we can like define the frequency here, or we can base this on a key. So like sort of not automated but manual, you know, every time I press 1 on my keyboard we're gonna switch from one video to the other. It's really random videos, by the way. Then we have random, so it's just based on noise, so it just cuts randomly. And also based on audio, so if we just go in here, turn on the audio, you can see like it switches between videos based on the kick. Gonna get rid of this again. And we have a bunch of options here. If we want random order, where we want the video to start, if we want a random start of the video, or if we want to also add randomness to, for example, the kick of the audio, and some other things here. So we're gonna look at all of this, like how to set up the controls later on. For now, what we're gonna look at is how to build this from scratch. And the basic idea, what's going on here is that we have a folder dat, which is just looking through a bunch of, which is just looking into one folder on your computer, where you should have some video files. And I'm gonna talk about that in a second. And we have a movie file in, which is just loading a different file every time. And yeah, that might not seem very efficient. I also tried this with a replicator, but I didn't really notice any difference. What's important here though, and this yeah, it's really quite an important point, these should not be like MP4s or normal MOV files. These should always be HAP code, like in the HAP codec, or the Notch LC would also work. And to convert your files into that, there's a really cool tool called Shutter Encoder, which I just recently found, which works both for Windows and Mac, and it's free, just based on donations. And yeah, it's a great tool to convert all of your movie file or your video files into the HAP codec, and then it's no problem loading them like one after the other from your hard drive, because it's like a super fast and efficient codec. It's generally like highly recommended for any kind of video playback in TouchDesigner. It should always be in the HAP codec. So make sure now to set up a folder with your movie files, with your video files, and also make sure to convert these video files into the HAP codec before we get started here. Alright, so let's actually rebuild all of this from scratch. I'm gonna go out here and let's get started. Alrighty, so I'm gonna create a new base here in which we're gonna be working. And I'm gonna give this base some kind of color. And I'm going to call this video cutter. And let's just, like, you don't have this, I'm just going to turn the cooking off here. And we're going to be working inside of here. So we're going to start with a folder dat. So that's sort of our base. And if you add a folder dat, what you're going to see is all the files that you have in your project folder. So the folder that the project that you're working on is in. And now we need to specify a few things here. So first off, what I want to do is just select a folder I've already picked, like I've already copied the path. So you can just click on the plus and locate the whatever folder you want to use. And now what you can see if you look closely here is that there's one thing in here that is not a file, but a folder, this other folder. So what we can do, we don't want to have folders in there, we just want to use files. So we can just change the type to just files. And you can see it just cuts away that folder. And we can also turn off all extensions and just use image and movie extensions. So obviously this also works for images, not just videos, but this video is going to be focused on video content. Right, so let's use a select here because we really just want to have the paths here, straight up paths, no header and no names. So I'm going to just change this to index and add a 1 here. And same here, just change this to index and add a 1. And now we just have a nice list of all of our paths. So I'm going to add null. and just call this list. And I'm gonna add a movie file in, which is really our main operator here, obviously. So I'm gonna give this like a color, and just add a fit afterwards, and a null, and an out too. And on this fit, I'm gonna change the resolution to 1280 by 720. And basically I'm doing this because, you know, the inputs that we have here might have different resolutions or aspect ratios, as like my videos certainly do. So with a fit, I'm just making sure they're all in the same resolution when we're like outputting them. I'm gonna call this BG. I'm gonna change the fit here to fit outside, but you can change, like, use whatever option you want here. All right. So the basic idea that we have, that I had for this, is that we have all of our paths here, and we just want to build some kind of logic that switches between all of these paths. So the paths is like they're always being they're being put in here, right? This is the where we put the path, and we just want to use some kind of just create some kind of logic that picks one of these paths, like one after the other or in a random order. So we're loading different videos. So let's do that. I'm gonna create an LFO for this, and this is gonna be our first input. And for all inputs, for all sort of starting points, I'm just gonna make them green to be a bit cleaner. I'm gonna call this channel LFO also just to be clean, and I'm gonna change the type to pulse. Then I'm gonna add a switch here. I'm gonna make the switch quite big and color it orange, because this is gonna be our main switch where we switch between our inputs. And then I'm going to add a rename. So all of our inputs, no matter what they're called, are going to be called the same here. So I'm going to call them index. And I'm going to add a trigger here. This is not entirely necessary. It's just making sure that whatever comes out here is always going to be exactly the same. So I'm just going to go down with all of these values. All right. And now I'm going to add a count to this. All right, so what we're doing here basically is we're just counting up one after the other every time the LFO hits. And basically we're using that number now. We're gonna use that to go through all of these rows to pick out different paths. So it's just gonna keep on incrementing. So on my limit, I'm going to change this to loop min max. And I want to automate this and not type it in manually here, but automatically get the amount of rows that we have here. So I can just do that by typing in op list and then .num rows with a capital R. We also need to subtract 1 because our rows only go up to 21 because they're starting at 0. Let's pulse this, so we're resetting it. And now once it reaches 21, it's just gonna jump back to 0. Cool. So now we can add a null to this and just call this index as well. And now we can use that to pick a different video here, a different path. So I'm gonna type in op list, and now we can just type in 0 and 0, and you're gonna see this is already working. So it just picks out the first row here. So if we change this to like 3, for example, it's going to use row 3. So instead of typing in that manually, we can now use the index, and we can do that by just typing in op index and then just use 0. And you can see that's not going to work because we need to convert this into an integer. So I'm just going to type in int parentheses and then also close that. All right, so now you can see it just goes through one of these, one after the other, like through all of these, one after the other. And then once it reaches the end, it's just gonna jump back to the beginning. So that would be the way for just doing it straight, right? One after the other. But what if we want to change it so it's random, right? So for that, I'm going to add another count. And I'm just going to change the limit here again to loop min max and just change it to 999. Like, this is not necessary, but I don't like my numbers going up to like infinity. So that's why I'm doing that. I'm going to add a null here. Start now. Let's call this seed. And I'm going to add noise chop. On my noise chop, I'm going to go to channel. Just change this to samples and then both to 0. And instead of, you know, turning on time slice, because then it would be animated, we don't want an animated channel. We just want like one value every time this changes. So I'm going to use this and put it on the seed. And now you can see it just creates a random value every time this our LFO hits. I'm going to change the amplitude and offset both to 0.5, so we have a nice value between 0 and 1. So we can now remap this. And we're going to remap it to the same thing as we have here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste that in here. And just add a limit afterwards and change it here to round and then to 1. So let's push that all a bit over here. Let's add a switch in here. Put that limit into the as a second input and change this to orange and change this to 1. And now you can see it just randomly picks videos in like no specified order. And we can turn this on and off. And we're going to change, like we're adding all these switches so we can later on when we're creating the custom parameters, we can instantly just use these to switch between on and off states. Alright, so we have the logic for picking either in an order, in the alphabetical order, or randomly. So now let's look at how we can trim these files so they're not always starting at 0, so at the very beginning of the video. So for that I'm going to add a constant, and I'm going to add a switch to this constant, and I'm going to add a noise as well. Put that in here. So actually we can just copy this noise, paste it, and put that in here. And for the seed I'm just going to add like 100, just plus 100, so it's a different seed. And on my switch here, like after my switch, I'm going to add a rename. Let's just call this trim. Add a null, and let's call this null trim2. And on my switch again, I'm going to make this orange. And now what we can do, what's happening here is that we have one constant value that we can change, right? So we can define trim at 0.55, for example. So now we can use this. Let's turn on trimming here on the movie file in, and let's use this as a trim start. So this is the fraction, right? So it's like 0.5 is half the video. So we're starting at the middle of the video. So yeah, this is the way we can do this manually. And if you just go ahead and we can change this to 1. And now we're using a different trim every time. So I might actually want to go down with the roughness. I think that kind of helped last time. And we can also go down with the period. But that's the way to go, right? We're just trimming and we're starting the video at a different point every time. So again, we have a switch. We have an on-off state where we can define, do we want to change, like do we want to start the video at the same value every time, or do we want to change it start it at a random value every time. There we go. Okay, so that's that logic. And let's now look at some more inputs here. So first off, let's just add a keyboard in, which is a very straightforward way to just change it. I'm going to give this the same green, change this index to 1. And now if I just turn this on for a second, it's just going to play the video. And every time I press 1, it's just going to cut to a different video. So what we want to do next is create a random, like a bit of randomness here. So I'm going to add a noise and just change the time slice to on. And I'm going to change the amplitude and offset again, both to 0.5. And then I can add a trigger here. And on my trigger, I'm going to change the threshold to 0.5. And let's go down with all of these values. So now you can see every time the noise here, like the value here, if it's above 0.5 and goes below 0.5 and then again above 0.5, like if it was below and then goes above 0.5, then the trigger here is being triggered. So it's quite random, right? Because it's based on noise. So let's just input that here. And again, let's make this noise green. And what we can do here now, if we change it to 2, what we can see here now is that now it's being randomly cut from one video to another. So I'm gonna just change my channel here to 0.2. And let's now have a look at how you can use this randomness not only as a randomness itself, but in combination with other inputs too. So what we can do here, we can add a math. We can use this in here. Let's change combine chops to length. And let's just add a switch here again. Let's make this orange. Let's go ahead and turn this off. Put that into the switch. Change this to 1. And now if we change this to 0, you can see like it hits straight with the LFO. Let's make this a bit faster. You can see that a bit better maybe. But it also adds like random cuts in between. So that's a really nice way to make it a bit more interesting, especially now when we're looking at audio. So let's do that. Again, I'm going to turn this off. And I'm going to start with an in, actually. Not an audio file in, but an in. Because we might want to be able to just add an audio file into our base from outside. So for that, I have an in here. I'm also going to add an audio file in and put that into the second input. So if we don't have an input in here, we always have this input as a substitute. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is. I'm going to add an audio device out here and just bypass it. What I'm going to do now is add a, what you could do is, 1 second. Okay, I don't actually have that. I have a nice audio analysis tool on my Patreon that you can just use to quickly get out kick, snare, and hats. But for now, I'm just going to show you a very simple way. So I'm just going to use math here, combine channels average, add a spectrum, add an analyze. So it's the usual way I do this now. So yeah, add an analyze, add a trigger, and change the threshold to 0.1. It works nicely on this song. It doesn't mean that it's gonna work on every song, so you just have to like adjust your threshold value to the input. But like this, you can see it works nicely and like basically reacts to the kick of our input. So I'm gonna add a rename. Let's just call this kick. And let's go ahead and we can basically just use that here right away. So I'm going to change this to input free. And if we now look here and again turn on the audio. And let's not have randomness in here. You can see the video is being triggered by the kick. So one last thing I want to show you here. And again, I'm going to turn this off, and this as well, is that we might want to do something like only change the video on every second kick hit or snare hit. This can be also snare. To do that, what we can do is let's first add a constant. So it's just like a value of 0. And then let's add a switch here, another switch. Let's change the order, so that our constant is the first. Let's add a count here again. And I'm going to change the count limit to loop min max and just 1. Let's add a null. Let's call this null switcher. Let's make it active, use it on our index. And now you can see it switches between like this state of the constant and the kick every time the kick hits. So it means it only takes every second kick into consideration. Or, you know, only, yeah, whatever. So let's add another switch. I'm going to make this one yellow and this one orange, just so we know it's like a sort of different one, even white maybe, like, so it's quite different. And let's put that in here and use it as a first input, so we can switch between the original plain kick input and the input of every second kick, basically. Cool. Of course, you can use any kind of other inputs here. This could also be a MIDI. This could come from TD Ableton. This could come from anything, really. This could also be like a device, like an audio device in, and every time you go over a certain threshold, like it triggers the video, like in the next video. So that would work to anything like that. And obviously, if you come up with some more logic for how the system is working, feel free to share that if you want to. And also you can add any kind of post-processing here. So this is really just a plain video right now, but you can use anything there. All right, so let's look at how you can add custom parameters to this. So I'm gonna right-click here, customize this component. let's just type in controls here, add this page, and you can see, we can now see that here. I'm going to actually click on this little list icon, so we have a floating window, because I want to dive back into here and change some things. So the first parameter that we want to have is this folder parameter. So I'm just going to grab this from here, drag it on here, and just say bind new par as master. And I'm going to change the label to media folder. So I like that name a bit more. And now you can see we already have that appearing here. Another thing that we definitely want to have is the switch here, right? That's kind of one of our main things. So what I can do is can just again drag that in here, bind new par as master. I'm going to give this a section, so it's like divided from the other one. Looks a bit cleaner. I'm going to change the index here to like the label to something that makes more sense. I'm going to change it to LFO, and then just a line, key, line, random, line, and then audio. So we just know which one to pick when we're just changing this. When we are changing this. On my range, I'm going to change this to 3 on the max. And we don't actually need to clamp this. It doesn't really matter. We can just go down here and switch between all of these different inputs. And you can see we're switching them right away. Cool. So then we're gonna just add a few more options here. So first off, what I want to do is add a toggle and just call this random order. And add this parameter. Again, give this a section. And let's right click on here, copy this parameter, and this is the switch where we're defining whether to use the noise based, so the random index, or the just straight up counting index. So that's where we want to pass our bind. So now we can turn this on and off between like either being randomly picked or not. So another thing is that we might want to change, let's just add another toggle that's called random start. And let's right click on here and let's use that on this switch past the bind. So if I turn this on, it's gonna just use the trim value from the noise, right? And if I turn this off, it's just gonna use that straight value. And we also wanna be able to define that straight value. So what I can just do is grab that and bind new par as master. And let's change the label here to video start. Okay, so now I can set that here. All right, so another thing we might want to change is this add randomness thing, right? So again, we can just go ahead and change this to toggle, and it's just called as add randomness, very straightforward. And let's right click on here, copy this parameter, and paste that into the switch 4 here. So now I can change between being like randomness being added or not. All right, so for the next parameters, I want to give them some kind of headers so we know what's going on. So it's a bit cleaner. So for that, I'm going to add like a string. I'm just going to call this like N1 for like name 1 or label 1, whatever. Let's give this a section. Let's actually just label it with like a whatever that's called. And let's change the default here to LFO, and also make this a read only, and then we sort of have our header here. So let's just copy this twice. Let's give this one let's get rid of the 2 and just call this random, proper random. And for one, let's just call that audio, and let's get rid of the 3 here. So on the first one, on the LFO, I just want to have this frequency button slider. That's a slider. And again, bind that as a master. And then we have that here. So I'm in control of our frequency. And on the noise, I want to do the same thing with the period. But I might want to change the ranges here a bit. So my min range might like be 2.2 and the max like 2. That's also, we don't need any clamping here. Default can stay at 1. And so now we have a nice slider between 0.2 and 2. I think that's a good value. And if we reset it, it's going to be at 1 because that's the default value here. All right, last but not least, by the way, one thing that we might want to add here is just like a little explanation, like lower is faster, something like that. Last but not least, we want to add like a toggle where we can switch between halftime and not halftime. So again, I'm just going to add a toggle that's called halftime. Add that, and right click, copy this parameter, and paste that bind on here. Cool. So now you have control over this space. What you can do now is you could go to your My Components. If you don't have a folder, you can create a new folder, and then you can do this, put this wherever, just drag it in there. Like just open up one and just drag it in there. Cool. So I would highly recommend donating to the guy that made this this little tool here for video conversion, because I really like that. If you're using it, it's really quite a powerful tool, and I've been looking for a HAP converter for ages, so it's really good to have that now. And if you want to support me, and if you want to have some extra content and all that kind of stuff, you can support me on Patreon. The link is in the description. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.